imagine for a second that you've hit midlife. You've spent years, maybe decades, just carefully tending everyone else's garden.
Right. Doing exactly what's expected of you.
Exactly. You've watered your responsibilities. You've pruned away your own expectations to make room for others. And you've kept the household clock wound perfectly tight.
Yeah.
And then one day, somewhere between writing a grocery list and, I don't know, remembering a forgotten dream, you hear this quiet knock from inside your own chest.
Wow. Yeah. That's a powerful image.
Well, today's deep dive is all about answering that knock. We are unpacking this really expansive document that details a conceptual AI-assisted music album. It's titled, She Didn't Have an Affair, She Had an Awakening.
I love that title.
Right. It's so good. And our mission here is to explore this not just as like an indie folk record, but as a deeply relatable roadmap for personal reclamation.
Absolutely.
We're looking at how you can use creativity not just as some weekend hobby, but as a literal survival tool, to navigate midlife self-discovery.
And it's an incredibly rich project to dig into because right from the first note, it fundamentally rejects those cliche narratives society usually hands us about midlife.
Yeah, the whole midlife crisis stereotype.
Exactly. When we think of a midlife crisis, we usually picture a desperate escape, someone buying a ridiculously expensive sports car or, moving to a cabin in the woods.
Or surgically trying to freeze time to regain their youth.
Right, exactly. But the documentation we're looking at reveals a completely different approach. It's a highly detailed psychological look at an emotional transition.
So it's not an external escape at all?
No, not at all. It maps the journey from a state of very quiet, almost imperceptible internal unrest, all the way toward a state of joyful, grounded self-integration.
I really want to focus on that phrase, that quiet internal unrest, for a second. Because the album's structural arc begins with a phase called the prelude.
Yes, the prelude.
And the companion narrative to this album, it's this prose piece called The Woman Who Learned to Rewrite Fire. It describes this phase in a really unusual way.
It does, yeah.
It explicitly states that the central conflict isn't a person fighting against a toxic boss or a villainous spouse. The conflict is internal authorship versus inherited identity.
Exactly. The narrative points out that the protagonist realizes her life was partially unwritten by herself.
Partially unwritten by herself. That's heavy.
Right. And what's fascinating is the pacing of that realization. In movies, a psychological shift is usually explosive.
Oh, yeah. There's a screaming match in the pouring rain.
Plates are thrown, or someone dramatically walks out the door. But this framework describes the pacing as organic. It compares it to a night blooming flower.
Wow.
It begins with just a pause in the middle of an ordinary morning, like just a flicker of heat behind the ribs.
It's like realizing you've lived in this sprawling house for decades, but you're only walking through half the rooms because someone else locked the doors.
And you just accepted it.
Yeah, you just accepted the inherited blueprint of the house. But, I have to ask, how does that shift actually begin in a practical sense?
That's the big question.
Like, how do you go from feeling like, to quote the text, ink someone spilled, to actually picking up the pen? What does that look like on a random Tuesday afternoon?
Well, the mechanism the album outlines for this initial shift is deceptively simple. It's awareness. But it's a very specific kind of awareness.
Okay, what kind?
So in the opening track, Margins of the Manuscript, the shift happens when the protagonist simply starts noticing what she had previously stopped noticing.
Like tuning back in.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The text describes a moment where she is writing out a mundane grocery list. Milk, eggs, bread. And she absent-mindedly writes her own name in the corner of the page. Very small.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, the realization isn't loud. It's just the quiet discovery that the margins of her story contain all these suppressed, forgotten dreams.
So you can't rewrite a manuscript until you realize you're currently living in the margins of it.
Right, exactly.
So it's about acknowledging the void. But once you realize you're in the margins, what happens next? You can't just stare at your name next to the milk and eggs forever.
No, you definitely can't.
The mind needs a way to process that kind of identity shift.
That's where the structure of the album introduces 4 core archetypes to anchor the internal journey.
4 archetypes, okay.
Yeah, these are specific psychological states of being that the protagonist has to learn to communicate with. First, you have the writer, which represents the newly emerging active voice.
The emerging voice, got it.
Then the muse, which is the returning creative force and hunger. Third is the younger self, representing the unresolved past. And finally, the witness, the observing consciousness that oversees all of this.
Okay, hold on. I want to ground this for the listener because Like, the younger self and the witness, they can sound a little clinical.
A bit like therapy jargon, sure.
Exactly. How does a normal person actually interact with these archetypes in their own head while they're driving to work or folding laundry?
That's a really crucial point to understand. These aren't abstract concepts, they are daily realities. The younger self isn't some ghost hovering in your kitchen. The younger self manifests when you find yourself getting disproportionately, furiously angry at your spouse for a minor comment.
Oh, because that comment unconsciously triggered a 20-year-old insecurity about not being heard.
Exactly. It's the part of you that still feels 16 and ignored.
That makes so much sense.
And the witness, on the other hand, is that tiny objective voice in the back of your mind that detachment brings. It's the voice that asks, why did you just agree to host Thanksgiving again when you know it exhausts you?
Ouch. Yeah, I know that voice.
By naming these states as archetypes, the album gives the listener a way to sit at the table with their own conflicting emotions without being consumed by them.
Okay, that makes total sense. So the lyrics themselves act as a practical framework for interacting with these points of yourself?
Yes, precisely.
The documentation mentions a track called Lipstick on the Library Card, where the protagonist draws a line of red lipstick on a restroom mirror and slips between the library shelves.
Yeah, it's a great visual.
And there's another track, Letters I Never Sent, which is about emotional excavation and releasing regret. But I have to push back a bit here.
Okay, go for it.
I get that this is a beautiful story about one specific woman finding herself, but honestly, putting on lipstick to go to the local library feels incredibly specific to her life.
It does.
How is the listener supposed to use this as a roadmap if they don't share her exact circumstances?
It's a fair question, but you really have to look at the lyrics as a universal framework wrapped in a specific aesthetic.
Oh, I see.
The library card, the lipstick, the grocery list, those are just narrative vessels for universal psychological steps. Lipstick on the library card isn't literally instructing you to vandalize a mirror.
Right, please don't do that.
Yeah, don't do that. It's a framework for reclaiming sensuality and playfulness without shame, which is something that often gets buried in midlife.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense.
And Letters I Never Sent is about the universal need to articulate grief or anger without the burden of actually having to deliver to the person who hurt you.
Yeah, just getting it out.
Right. The progression of the album moves through awakening, curiosity, courage, defiance, creation, and liberation. That emotional arc applies to anyone, regardless of their specific daily routine.
And it completely reframes the concept of aging along the way.
Absolutely it does. The lyrics consistently refuse to frame aging as a decline. In a later track, maturity is framed as a newfound power.
Oh, I love that.
The lyrics declare, I am the second bloom of spring. It proves that emotional literacy, like the ability to name and own your shifting internal tides, isn't just a coping mechanism, it is a sacred generative force.
But if the lyrics are providing this profound psychological blueprint, we need to talk about the sound of those shifting tides, the musical production of this album.
Oh, the production notes are wild.
Because I was reading through the source notes, and the technical foundation of this deeply intimate, analog-sounding record is entirely baffling to me.
The technical specs are incredibly rigorous, yes.
Rigorous is an understatement. The artist crafted this on a Linux operating system, specifically Ubuntu 26.04 LTS.
Codenamed Resolute Raccoon.
Yes, Resolute Raccoon. And they were using an alpha build of an open-source digital audio workstation called Audacity-4.
Which is pretty hardcore.
Right. If you know anything about audio software that is a rigid, clinical, command line kind of environment, yet the sonic identity of the album is built entirely on warm analog textures.
It's a huge contrast.
The tempos rest carefully between 68 and 92 beats per minute. There are gorgeous instrumentation motifs like a piano rise to represent memory, strings swell to represent courage.
Yeah, it's beautifully composed.
And they even left intentional imperfections in the mix, like vinyl crackle and tape saturation. But please, explain the mechanics of this to me.
Okay, I'll try.
How does someone use such bare-bones, open-source, purely digital software to create vinyl crackle and tape saturation that sounds like an old journal learning to sing? That sounds like trying to carve a wooden sculpture using a spreadsheet.
That is a perfect way to put it. It does seem like a massive contradiction at first glance. But when you look at the mechanism of how this software forces you to work, the production philosophy perfectly mirrors the narrative story.
How so?
Because Audacity-4 in this specific alpha build is so stripped down, the artist couldn't rely on automated, glossy commercial plugins to magically make everything sound warm and perfect.
Right, there's no make it sound vintage button.
Exactly. If you want a tape hiss or a room tone in that environment, you have to literally go out and capture it. You have to record the physical sound of the room you are sitting in, capturing the hum of the refrigerator or the scrape of a wooden chair.
Wow.
And then you painstakingly layer that underneath the digital tracks to force it to feel alive.
So they are actively authoring the imperfection.
Exactly. When you use an alpha build of open source software, you're working with something unfinished, something you have to actively coax and shape into working for you.
Just like the protagonist.
Yes. Just as the protagonist is reclaiming her messy, authentic, flawed self from the rigid, perfectionist expectations of society, the artist is using rigid digital tech to build a profoundly human, imperfect analog warmth.
That's incredible.
The digital environment is just a cold, empty room. The artist is deliberately choosing to fill it with the sound of breathing.
That is a brilliant way to capture the theme. But if the artist was chasing this deeply flawed human analog warmth, why introduce artificial intelligence into the process?
The AI component.
Yeah, this brings us to the most provocative part of the documentation. The source notes detail that the album utilized AI tools like Google Flow Music and ChatGPT. Isn't AI the exact opposite of organic human imperfection?
It definitely seems that way.
Relying on algorithms seems to fly in the face of everything we just talked about regarding self-authorship.
That is the exact tension this project explores. But there is a massive, heavily underlined caveat in the documentation regarding how the AI was used.
Okay, what is it?
These tools did not operate autonomously. The AI functions strictly as a collaborator, an amplifier, and a translator of intent.
Yeah.
It was never the author.
Oh, I see. It's like using a power loom instead of knitting a blanket by hand.
Exactly.
The machine weaves the threads infinitely faster than humanly possible, and it handles the repetitive structural math, but you still have to choose the color of the yarn, the pattern of the tapestry, and ultimately you are the one who decides if the blanket is actually going to keep you warm.
That is the perfect analogy.
Right.
And the documentation makes this boundary line incredibly clear. AI is used as an instrument, not an identity.
An instrument, not an identity. That's a great distinction.
The human remains the primary creative voice. Think about the mechanics of prompting an AI for music. You can't just say, make a sad song.
Right, the output would be generic.
Exactly. The human has to dictate, I need the strings to swell at the exact moment a woman realizes she spent 20 years silencing her own voice to keep her family comfortable.
Oh.
The AI can generate the acoustic rendering of the strings, but the AI doesn't know what a midlife crisis feels like. The AI has never compromised its dreams to keep a household running. The human emotion is the irreplaceable engine.
That distinction really challenges our traditional ideas about artistic identity.
It really does.
We tend to think that if you don't physically pluck the violin string, you aren't a real musician. But this proves that technology doesn't inherently dilute self-authorship.
Exactly. And think about the empowerment aspect. Imagine you have a symphony of complex emotions trapped inside your head for decades, but you never had the time, the money, or the resources to learn an instrument or hire a 50-piece orchestra.
Right, most people don't.
AI kicks that locked door wide open. It allows someone without formal musical training to finally translate their internal music into an external reality.
Which brings us to the culmination of the album's structural journey, the coda.
The coda, yes.
With the technological instruments understood and the psychological archetypes integrated, how does the story actually resolve? Does she burn it all down?
That's the usual expectation.
Right, because usually in Hollywood midlife awakening stories, the protagonist blows up her life. She leaves her family, quits her corporate job in a blaze of glory, and moves to Tuscany.
Yeah, this album intentionally subverts that destructive trope. We see the transformation crystallize in tracks like Wild at Intermission and the finale, Wildfire After 40.
Okay, wildfire. So there is a fire.
There is, but the fire here is generative, not destructive. The lyrics explicitly state, Wildfire After 40 burns without destruction's cost.
Oh, without destruction's cost.
Right. In the track, Ink-Stained Hands, she sings, Ink-Stained Hands, I come alive through every mark I make. She realizes that midlife isn't the closing chapter, it's halftime. Creativity functions strictly as survival.
So if the fire doesn't consume her life, how does this integration actually look for the listener? What does restoration look like when you still have to wake up, pack lunches, go to work, and pay a mortgage?
It looks like inhabiting your life fully, rather than abandoning yourself to endure it. By the final track, the rebellion isn't about creating chaos or fleeing responsibilities.
All right.
She hasn't escaped her life. She has just finally occupied the center of it.
Mm-hmm.
Identity, creativity, and desire are unified into one unshakable presence.
That's beautiful.
She becomes both the author and the protagonist. She still packs the lunches and goes to work, but she no longer mutes her own voice or hides her desires while doing it. The fire isn't burning down the house. The fire is the warmth that finally makes the house a home she actually wants to live in.
That is such a powerful image to end on, and it brings this whole discussion right back to you, the listener. We all have margins in our manuscript.
We really do.
We all have those quiet dreams, those half-formed thoughts, those creative impulses that we've folded away into drawers just to keep the peace or maintain the schedule.
Yeah, just to get by.
This deep dive into she didn't have an affair, she had an awakening, isn't just an analysis of an indie folk album or a tech review of open source Linux software. It is an invitation.
A roadmap, really.
Yes, an invitation to view your own midlife, or honestly, whatever major transition phase you find yourself navigating right now, as an ignition rather than a decline. It's a reminder that when you spend your life tending everyone else's garden, it is never too late to stop, listen to that quiet knock inside your own chest, and finally answer the door.
And that framework leaves us with a truly fascinating new horizon to consider.
What's that?
Well, we've talked about how this artist used artificial intelligence as a power loom to weave decades of suppressed, complex emotions into high-fidelity art.
Right.
If AI can now act as a perfect translator for our deepest, most unspoken internal conflicts, what happens to the future concept of therapy?
Oh, wow.
Will the psychological healing of the next generation look less like sitting on a couch trying to verbally explain your trauma to a doctor, and more like sitting at a computer, prompting a creative AI until it finally sings your exact pain back to you in a way you could never articulate yourself?
That is wild.
That is a wild new instrument for the second act of life.